Right, we're back in the library and we're going to deal with the import process now. As I say, this is just a quick hacked tutorial. It's nothing scripted, I'm just improvising, as you can probably tell. So the first thing I want to do is within the library tab, I want to come down and click import. You then need to locate, so you can capture direct from card, camera, drive, and it will look for common locations. I'm just going to hit browse. It's going away and finding different photo shoots, etc. So I'm going to hit browse, go to my desktop. I've got a folder called Tech Shots, which are here. Sorry, this one, Technology Shots. Hit choose. And I'm going to hit, don't know why it's ignoring me. Let me just cancel that because that's not the folder. Keeps going into the wrong folder. Okay, so here you can see I've got 189 photos. These were actually taken by students on a day where we wanted to shoot some devices. Some of them are poor quality. There are many in different formats. If I scroll down, bear in mind that the computer is currently recording, screencasting, and it's a fairly old machine. It's getting low-res previews of all the images. So you see a broad range of phones, tablets, devices, laptops. I'm just going to have select all on, and I'm just going to say import, and it'll go away and bring those in currently. Now, might be a bit sluggish, it doesn't look too bad at the moment. It is also going to create previews, etc., associated with this phase, depending on the settings that you have on your computer. What I will warn you is that Lightroom can eat up your hard drive dramatically. I've been using Lightroom for a number of years. Without doubt, it is the biggest hog of hard drive space I've ever come across. So each of the images is large enough with a modern camera. Now, I've only got an 18 megapixel camera, but that shoots sort of images around about 3 to 4 meg in RAW format, maybe as much as 5 or 6. And then on top of that might shoot a couple of thousand sometimes in a day, so you've got a lot of space there. Then when it creates previews, it caches a lot of different size scaled previews just to make itself work more efficiently, but if you're not careful it will store all that on your hard drive. Hence my advice about creating a new catalogue before you start for each project. So you've got your import here. As you can see, if I go through some of these, it'll tell you we've got some that are JPEGs. You can see here by the file extension. It tells you under the metadata what device these was shot on, if it knows. So you can see this was shot on a Nikon D7000, and they're shot with a JPEG setting. If we move on a little bit further along my catalogue, you will see that I have also got, should have, in here a load of RAW formats. This is Nikon RAW, so NEF is Nikon RAW format. I think I should, this particular one was shot on a D3100, so it's a different camera. So we've got a number of different cameras here. It tells you about the lenses that were being used at the time, etc. We should have some that are shot on a Panasonic as well. Again, exposure and information detail. You can see flash didn't fire, and probably should have in this case. So there are things like that. Obviously, Lightroom is an extremely powerful tool at correcting and fixing problems. It's probably more powerful at a lot of the photo adjustments than Photoshop itself. I don't know if I can back that up with any hard scientific evidence, but certainly that's my gut feeling, is that there seems to be a much greater control of things like exposure and noise reduction and tone curves in here than just doing it in the Adobe RAW camera module within Photoshop. So hence the fact that it's a sort of choice of professionals amongst photographers, etc. So you can see a range of different formats like so. Okay, they've all got different names because they were all shot on different devices, but let's say all of these were shot in one shoot. My first task that I often do is to select all. So I'm just going to minimize the left bar there, and I'm going to go up to select all, edit, and hit select all to make sure all of the images are currently selected. And then I'm going to go to library and rename photos. It's F2. Okay, this is where I get the opportunity, instead of them having random camera related names, I can go in and decide to have a file name or a file name with a sequence combination, and I can put in things like custom text. So for example, I might determine that my file name is going to be, rather than being the original file name, I might want to replace file name with something like a custom name. Or a folder name or something like that. In fact, let's go to custom name and sequence. Okay, so I've got some custom text in here, so I can edit that, and we can decide, maybe I'm going to call these tech_shots. Okay, now by default, obviously working between Mac, PC, etc., this software tends to not like spaces. You can change things like, I personally don't like hyphens. I find them harder to read than underscores. So I would want to call mine something like tech_shots_, and then I'm going to choose, because I shoot a lot, maybe a 4-digit sequence. So first shot will be 0001. Okay, it's going to keep the file extension. It's not going to change that at the moment, and it's going to roll through the entire folder. So I just hit done when I'm happy, and then I decide if I'm starting at 1. For example, if I'd already done a shoot and then I was adding more, I can start at whatever number I finished on the last time. So just hit OK, and it's going to go through, and it's basically done that. It's renamed them. So now if I click on a random shot here, you can see that this is 140. So tech shots 140. So that's the first thing. Okay, it will actually change and rename normally the files, but not in the root directory here. These are the original files. It will rename them when I export them. So it's an internal thing. You see, I haven't got it to rename the original photos that I brought in at this stage. Okay, so our next phase that we would normally do is sorting. We also might decide, while we're at it, to select all and to apply things like labels, meta tags, stuff like this. You could override and put in specific camera things if you knew it was wrong. But for example, you can give a name to each of the individual shots. This only appears in Lightroom in the top corner. I'm not going to bother at the moment. You can set up things like metadata. You can give things titles or captions, or you can put in, for example, copyright information. Okay, when you go to put in copyright information, it's just going to warn you. It's going to apply it or update it to all. Now, I usually on my camera have the copyright information auto put on my Nikon. It adds it automatically into the file straight away as I shoot it. But I'm going to put in here copyright, and I'm going to say, let's put 2016, and I might put my name in there, for example, and then I'm just going to hit sync settings. You can add any other things as well. I could put my name into creator field. Normally I would automatically create my own profile, and the very powerful thing about this is once you've got all this done once, you can actually save them as presets. So if I'm doing regular photo shoots, I don't need to put all this in every time. I can go in and put in particular keywords, etc., for a particular job, but I don't need to put in every time retyping the same details. So you can see these were taken a while ago. We should probably have changed that metadata accordingly. If they were shot in 2014, I should keep it up to date. So I hit sync settings and just say apply. So it just applies that. You can also see it's going to apply any other settings at the moment. I'm just going to cancel for the moment. Okay, sync metadata rather than settings. Excuse me, I hit the wrong button. So basically that's applied it to each file. It's a lot more efficient than doing it manually, as you can see. Okay, next thing that we do is we go to the beginning. So all the way to the top, hit the first shot. It's going to deselect and then hit the first shot. Okay, if I double click this, I can see it. It will automatically, I can see it as a single image. It fills the frame rather than in thumbnail mode. You can also cycle between these using the buttons down here. You can also see one versus the one next to it if you're trying to compare which is better. Normally what I do is I go through in this mode and you've got stars. So you could manually give something a star rating. You can also zoom in to see what the quality's like. So I might decide that this is pretty poor. And you can use your left and right arrow keys to cycle between. So this might be a little better. Let's just zoom out a bit. Okay. And I'm moving through and I might just randomly set ratings depending how sharp things are. It's just moving back and forward between these two. Okay, you can see that the ratings here appear. So I'd cycle through my photos. A lot of these are blurred, you see. So I might give them fairly low ratings. And then I can sort via rating. So that one's looking a lot better. That one's sharp. That one's not so sharp, etc. Okay, so you get the idea. So the point of doing this is that later you can turn on filters and you can filter things that have a certain number of stars, etc. So you can only see things that have been rated, or if I had to stop now and come back later, I could come in and see only the photos that have yet to be rated. And I can carry on my work, and you see that as I rate things, they just disappear. So it's just sort of a pipeline process that you can use when deciding what are your candidates. Okay, this is an early sort of stage. You can even have, I think you can have zeros or just ignore them, but you can get the basic idea here. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to turning these off. Let's turn the filter off. So I'm just going to use this little toggle here to turn that off, and that will bring back all our things as well. It also means that we can make the filter equal to something. So for example, I'm only looking for 4-star images. I can click on there and I'll only get my 4-star candidates. This now means that I can go in and look at them in greater detail and compare one to the one next to it. So I can see which is blurry and what areas, etc. You can see these are fairly terrible shots. Obviously, the person who took this didn't use a tripod, and they look a bit hand taken and shaken. But I can cycle through them, etc. And I can look at which one might be the very best. Okay, I'm just going to pick one at random, which is I'm going to pick this one at the moment. Okay, you can also add them to quick collections and things up here, and smart collections and so on. So you can rate things by different styles or by dates. There's all sorts you can do in here to sort things. Okay, so I'm going to take this photo forward, but you get the idea. This is your naming, metadata, and sorting phase. Okay, once we have a sorted candidate, or we get to a certain quality and we go through our catalog again, we could devaluate any that clearly aren't up to that. So if we've gone back to this now and decided that this first shot is never a 4 shot, it should be a 2, we can set that to a 2. Okay, so I'm going to use this last image, which I think from memory was the sharpest. Okay, we also have the ability within these, take this back to this mode. We also have the ability within this to create a virtual copy of something. So I've got this image here, and what I'm going to do is right click and say create a virtual copy. Okay, so here is my original image, here is my virtual copy. You can see no difference between them. They are even the same number, 18, and then there's made a copy. The main reason we have the copy, the virtual copy, is that when we go into the next module, which is develop, we can try out settings. So this is the original, and I'm going to try out a load of settings on here. Now there are a number of preset ones down the left which you could try out. So you could try out aged photo or cold tone, and there are tons of these. Now to me these look a little chintzy. I'm just going to undo and undo. They're a little like the sort of filters you'll commonly get on your phone, but you never know. Depends what you're doing as to whether it's an appropriate thing. So I've got this image here. I'm going to zoom in a bit and I'm going to start playing with it. Okay, I can zoom to different aspect ratios, etc. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it. I'm going to go to I'm on my develop tab and I've got a number of options. I've got a histogram up here, which is showing me that in this image, things that should be black are not quite black. They're a little bit out. Okay, so I could drag that down on here. Likewise, I can do the same at the top. Now, not every photo is it going to be important to have whites and blacks. It's an overstated kind of basic rule, which in many cases works, but sometimes doesn't. Okay, so you need to interpret whether it's right by looking at the photo itself. So that will have made a few tonal adjustments. You can also preview the difference between before and after. Now at the moment can't see a lot of difference, and I'm going to split it so I can see them side by side. You probably see a little difference in the blacks in here in the sense of just how black they are, but not a great deal. Next thing I'm going to do, scrolling down here, I'm just going to toggle up the histogram. There are some adjustment things here. We can crop. We can also straighten. If our image was not right, you can see this is not quite straight, I can actually straighten it out, like so. Okay, first of all. I could also crop it accordingly, right? Now, I'm going to pretty much leave it where it was for now. But you could crop it if I wanted it tighter, etc. I'm going to leave it this size, but I have just slightly straightened it. There are other ones here as well. There's a spot removal tool. You can see here we had some dust on the lens on this particular shot by the look of it. So I can take that tool. You've got control over your brush size over here. And I can wander on in, find spots, and just click on them. What it will do then is show an area nearby which it's going to borrow space from. So it's actually going to cover over these little blemishes, looking for something with similar tone. And to be honest, it does a pretty remarkable job 9 times out of 10. Now, there's always an exception to every rule, and occasionally it might pick something from an area you didn't intend, and you may need to redo this. But it's a pretty powerful way of getting rid of basic spots and blemishes. Okay, so if I now deselect that, you'll see that those blemishes appear to have gone. When I have that tool selected, you can see all the ones that I've applied, and you can go in and actually adjust them individually. Okay, so very powerful from that respect as well. If it puts too harsh an edge on a spot retouch, you can go back in and soften it. Next one is for red eye removal. If you're taking a photo of somebody with flash and you get that red eye where it's bounced off the back of the retina, again, this takes it out sweetly. I don't have any eyes in this case, so I won't be able to demo it. But again, simple Google tutorial, very easy to use, almost idiot proof, and does a very good job 9 times out of 10, particularly in a high quality image, etc. Next one along is gradient sort of filter. You can see in the background here that we have some warm colours at the top. This is pretty white, but this is gone quite yellow in this corner. So this is a gradient filter, and I can use that by clicking and dragging, and I can define different settings like exposure or like white balance. So if I move it towards the yellow end, you can see that goes yellow. Because it already was a bit yellow, I'm going the other way, which is slightly bluish, and you can see it's pretty much taking that out. So this can be extremely powerful. It can also be used artistically. For example, you want to accentuate the blueness of a sky. This is a great technique for doing it. But it's great also as a retouching tool. You can create any new ones. You can also brush in the mask. And you've got complete control of all these settings down here. It's quite scary. This is why I'm saying there are things you can do in Lightroom you just can't do in Photoshop. Next thing is a similar one, but it's radial. Again, if there's an area which you wanted to correct, for example, around this corner of the screen, I can click, drag out, and I've got complete control over that area, or in this case, everything but that area. You can zoom up and you can invert the mask, so it's now affecting the area of what I had intended. Some of these settings you just need to intuit or fiddle with to get the right effect. So I can take out some of the green in there. I could also drop down my exposure a little bit. I don't want the background to go too light, so I'm going to keep that fairly consistent, but I might take my shadows down and you can see it's pretty much gone. Okay, I could do a similar one down the bottom here to take out reflection on the screen as well, but enough for now. The final one here is a simple kind of adjustment brush. Again, I'm going to use that on the bottom part of the screen here. You can see I'm painting along here and it's making an adjustment to this area. So I've got things like temperature, which I can adjust, make it a little colder. I've also got general exposure. So this is good for things like this bit of the screen where I might want to darken it off a bit. Maybe I don't want to use exposure, I want to use shadows. So I take that down a bit. But I can also recover a little bit the whites, like the word MacBook in this case. All of these settings are quite unique and they will work differently with different images. So you will need to allow yourself time to experiment. You can always remove and delete with the delete key that adjustment, or undo to return it. Okay, but if I found that my keyboard had gone a bit dark, let's zoom in, I could make another adjustment on this area and solely focus on lightening it. Okay, so I've got highlights, etc. But because it's dynamic, I've also got things like how soft or how sharp those areas are. So I can bring in a bit more sharpness and clarity. I can dehaze areas if there's a haze on them. Some of these are extremely powerful, some look a bit mad, and you've also got general sharpness factors, so I can sharpen the keyboard perhaps. I'm a bit careful with these. Plus, most importantly, you've got flow and feathering, which govern how big your brush is in the first place. Now, normally you'd want to adjust these beforehand, but it does allow you to paint in or out. Okay. You can also, for example, erase. So if it's gone on to areas I didn't want it to affect, I can come in and undo. And again, just Control Z undoes. All right. So those are the basic sort of tweaks, fixes for any image imperfections. Next thing is this panel down here. We have a set of custom effects in this case. Sorry, I'm still on that one, so I need to get rid. That was the effect that I've just painted there. So you do need to deselect these, and I do that by just clicking on them again, and then back comes the basic adjustments. So I'm going to just reduce this down, Control minus. You can use Control plus or Control minus to zoom in. So I just want to be able to see the full image. One very cool thing is it will automatically, you can see it's using the white balance that it shot on the camera, which is not bad, but there was a bit of yellow up here which we've corrected manually. You can stick with that. You can ask it to do automatic white balance. In this case, it's actually warmed up the colors. If I just undo, it's warmed up the colors of the MacBook, which I don't want. And then you can also do custom ones, and you can use your eyedropper to pick out an area that you know should be grey. So if I want this to be grey, and I click on it, it will set the white balance according to that. Okay. Now, you just might want to here play around with differences between as shot and a custom one and just decide which you're happiest with. You've also got general exposure for the whole image. Now you'll notice when you look through some of these photos that usually when I shoot a little bit dark because you can always recover a bit of noise. But if you go the other way and shoot very light, if you blow out an area to the point where you lose the detail, like in here, you can't build it back. Whereas if you underexpose, you can always lighten and correct. Okay. Now you want to be close, you don't want to be way out. I normally have my camera set up to shoot about a stop or two lighter. If you don't know what that means, well, then you need to get onto a Photoshop, a digital photography tutorial or something on Lightroom, maybe on lynda.com or something like that. Okay, but you want to be able to control your camera to shoot one stop. which is effectively what these things are here. As this clicks forward, each of these is like an aperture stop on a camera lens, if you like. So I tend to shoot a little bit dark, and then I'll either correct it in here. I sometimes use the exposure one. I also find that often cameras like to punch up the contrast. Now, I've turned that off on my Nikon, but I know it's one of the things I personally find a little bit with a lot of the Canon defaults is that it often tends to add contrast, and I tend to like less contrast, make things a little smoother. So I probably would reduce that. Depends what you're shooting. In this case, because it's a hard surface object, might have it up. We've got highlights, which govern literally the whites within the scene as a whole. We've also got shadows, which quite clearly, in this case, affect the screen and black areas. Okay, so you could bring that back to make the keyboard look more realistic, but then your screen's going to darken, so it might be a trade-off. This is where we'd probably work on this in Photoshop. And you've got whites, so you can literally burn the entire background out to white almost. Plus you've got black point. Okay, so all these things combined give you an awful lot of play anyway. Those are basic settings. In addition to which you have clarity, vibrance and saturation. Okay, the top two, it's worth just tweaking and seeing what happens. You tend to get sharper, but to me overly edgy looking results going high on clarity. Low tends to make things look soft. Sometimes people use these for portraits. I don't tend to touch this setting, hardly ever. Same with vibrance. I don't tend to touch it a lot. Okay, I might leave it a little negative in this case. What I tend to do instead is play with the saturation. So if I punch up the saturation, you can see the colors reflected on the MacBook. If I take it down, I'm effectively getting a black and white image, which in this case I might like. For now, I'm going to leave it roughly where it was. You can set it back to 0. The next stage is to look at tone curves. Okay, this allows me to adjust this image without just dealing with the highlights and shadows. So I might want to keep my keys black or keep them lighter but dark in this area. I can do so by targeting specific ends of the spectrum, like these are the shadows. This is the mid-tone section, etc. And you can see it can make a massive amount of difference by just changing some of the settings in here as to what's going on in the image. Okay, I'm just going to undo those for now. But I would fiddle with this usually. You've also got control over lights, highlights, sorry, lights, which in this case is the lighter colors, but which are part of like the MacBook Surface. So I want this to blow out to white, but I don't want this to. I would end up probably taking this into Photoshop to clean up the background anyway. And then your shadow detail governing the keyboard, etc. So I want that a bit lighter, and I'll sort the screen out and replace it later in Photoshop. You can choose as well types of curve, etc. The next tab, again, most of this is fairly advanced stuff, but you can adjust hue, particular colors, like if there are lots of reds in there, you could take them out, etc. There's also a saturation where you can target specific areas. So I've got a bit of cyan in this screen, so I could come in and potentially target that and take it out. Okay, if I hit undo a couple of times, you'll see the blues come back in the screen. So I could, if I've got a particular color that's bugging me, take it out. Okay, if I've got any greens in there I don't want, I could take those out, or some yellows. So I'm almost creating a black and white image in this case. Obviously, this is an object which is principally black and white. Okay. There's also black and white conversion options, etc. Okay, I don't tend to do my black and white conversion in here. I do it over in the presets over here. Next thing to mention, you can also adjust luminance, and you can adjust all of them simultaneously. I don't tend to do that myself. There's split toning if you wanted your lighter areas to have a certain color. You could make all your light colors have a blue tint, whilst making all your shadows have a red. You know, it's almost like two lights. Again, this is not something I tend to do, so I'm going to undo. You can reset at any point. Below split toning is detail. Now this is quite important because on this image you can see there's a little bit of blur, and you can adjust things like sharpening. Now as I say, one of the things I don't like on a lot of cameras is that there's auto sharpening, so I tend to have all my sharpening off and I do it afterwards. Now in this case there's a bit of movement because whoever took this handheld it. Now Photoshop would do a better job of removing that movement. It actually has a plugin that looks for lens blur like this from movement, and it would probably sharpen that beautifully. So I'm not going to sharpen it in here, but if I wanted to sharpen my image, this is where I'd do it. And also the difference in choosing your radius size makes a massive difference in the way that the sharpening looks. If I have that radius size tiny, I get a lot of grain. If I move it up, it's different. So it's a bit of trial and error messing about with some of these settings. You've got the level of detail in here, and you can see moving that up or down again makes a big difference. And finally you've got masking. Okay, so I'm going to basically put these back where they were. Okay, there's also noise reduction in dark areas on images in particular. Like my screen here, you can see quite a lot of noise, and again, you can use the noise reduction in here to take out some of that noise, but it is a trade-off. Sometimes it will make certain elements blurry, but you can see the difference between not using it at all and using it significantly, and you've got a detail and contrast thing. Again, I'm going to leave it off for now because I again have a plugin for that in Photoshop. You can also adjust if the noise, in this case it's pretty much a black and white image, so the noise isn't going to be color, but if you had a lot of color noise in here, like pinks and greens within your grays, this is to adjust your color noise. Okay, so noise and sharpening all under Detail tab. Next set of options down are lens correction. For example, on this particular image, because it was shot with a zoom lens, I've got a slight curve on the top of the laptop, and even here it's a little bit wide angled. So because it knows what it used, if you turn these on, you can actually go in to your image and actually analyze it, and you can see, you might have been able to see, it suddenly stretches or distorts or takes out things like the curvature, etc. So you can come in and actually put in a profile. So if I know I shot it on a Nikon and I know what Nikon it was, 18 to 200, you can see this thing changing dramatically as I move on. There's also a slider here to take out particular effects, but it should do a pretty good job automatically. And also if you've got any vignetting, which is like lightning or lighter shades or darkening towards the edges, which you get on certain lenses, then you can correct for that. So normally, again, most people wouldn't use this. Sometimes it's a curse rather than a help. You can also do some of these things inside Photoshop. There are effects. Again, I don't tend to do these, but you can set things like vignetting. So this is a vignette effect, and you can affect where the midpoint is if you're going for old black and white shot, etc. You can play around with those. It's particularly useful where you do have vignetting on something, like if you're taking images for texture work, or trying to make tileable textures or something like that, or you're shooting a white background, you're getting a darker edge. You can correct it, and particularly if you've taken 100 photos with the same settings, you can take it out of all of them in a few clicks. So that's pretty much effects. There's also a grain thing in there as well, where you can add grain if you wanted it all to look old, black and white, grainy photograph, then you could do it there. Finally, there are color calibration options here as well, so you can download periodically different profiles, and there are different profiles specific to your camera, etc. I have actually built my own ones of these before to match the Nikon's. Has a thing called active delighting, where it tries to remove noise in shadow, and it when you take the photos and look at them on the camera, they look slightly different than they do in Lightroom. There's a bit of an issue, I think, particularly between Nikon and Adobe, where they don't like to give away all the detail about their RAW format, and it seems to have resulted in the Nikon images not looking as good in Lightroom as they do in the Nikon software. A bit strange, obviously trying to sell their own software, but these are sort of basic settings. Anytime I can go back to reset. Okay, what I'm going to do is just bring up the two, and we can see before and after. Okay, so all I've done is adjust them there. I could do further work, particularly on the screen, if I wanted it to go darker. As I say, what I'd probably do in this case is do that inside Photoshop. I can also create another virtual copy. Excuse me, not vertical. And then you can cycle through the different ways of showing befores and afters. Then I can do something on that one, like I might put in a gradient on the top here, and here I might punch up the blacks for the screen and increase the shadow detail. I might even move it down a bit more, like so. Okay, so it's not affecting my keyboard, but it is affecting the screen, and I can see the difference between that and that. So that might save me a bit of time in Photoshop. And final thing I might even do is I might again create another virtual copy, and I might just see, because this is so black and white, I might just try it with a set of black and white presets. So I'll use the black and white presets here, and I can cycle through some of these. So high contrast, low contrast, look 1, look 2, look 3, and I can just cycle through these. You can also make and obviously save your own presets later. So I've got here, you can see quite a few different outputs. Now the original, because I corrected the color, etc., pretty much looks like a black and white. But occasionally what I do is I take out different sections with different presets. So I might decide that the keyboard looks better in this setting, but the screen looks better from that one, and I'll just remontage those inside Photoshop because they'll be in the same location. Okay, so that's basically the development module. I'm going to stop there, and that's probably about it for now. The only thing I will do is I'll do a final tutorial which will just show you how to export these files other than for print or web.